Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, cut off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
But you know good, Ann Camp. You're listening to the Ann Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson. Welcome back. So on Sunday, I don't know if y'all got a chance to watch it. I did not myself. I stopped watching the Grammys a little while back, and I'll explain why in a second. But I understand the Grammys happened on Sunday, and there were a few big winners. One of those big winners, it sounds like, was Beyonce, who won in some country music categories. I know that's controversial to some. And also Kendrick Lamar. It sounds like Kendrick Lamar cleaned up at the Grammys. And I couldn't help but to comment or repeat a comment that I saw on Twitter, and I can't remember what the brother's name was. But he did mention, I mean, shout out to Kendrick, you know, it is what it is. But he did mention that Kendrick Lamar got 0 Grammys for Good Kid, Mad City, which was his best work and a classic. 0 Grammys. It actually got beat by Macklemore, which was very political and whatever, right? His best work, Good Kid, Mad City, and got 5 Grammys for calling another man, in a diss record where he calls another man a pedophile. This is the Grammys for you. Good Kid, Mad City was an excellent album. You get 5 Grammys for a diss record? That's our industry, right? He went from losing to Macklemore to K-Dot actually, getting this win. It's just interesting what people win for, what they get rewarded for doing. I tend to think that there is a certain wickedness in our music industry. But that's just weird to me. And it was a solid diss record for what diss records are. But the message that he had in Good Kid, Mad City was so much. The music was, it was a better album all around. And of course, he was going against different people, but he lost to Macklemore. Which that whole conversation and that subject matter is something we could go into and talk about as well. But I just had to point that out. I thought that was interesting. Shout out to the people who worked hard all their life, and this is a major award for them. Don't want to bring that down, but it's just odd to me, man. Just something that I had to point out. Now, on a more serious matter, something else that I want to address is, man, there's just a lot of, and it's always happening, but it seems worse right now. And I think people don't know what to believe. There's a whole lot of misinformation on the internet right now, on social media right now. And a lot of Christians, again, don't know what to believe. And sadly, some of this information is making its way onto pulpits. It's making its way into the feeds and the accounts of Christian leaders who are repeating it, not knowing that some of this stuff isn't even legitimate. Okay. So what I want to ask y'all to do, I want to ask everybody to slow down and say, look, even though I don't like the other side, whoever that may be, I don't need to repeat the worst thing I hear about them immediately. Because while some of that stuff might be true, when it's not, again, we're losing credibility. We're freaking people out. There's enough, and don't get me wrong, there's enough stuff, serious stuff going on that we need to have concern. But for that very reason, we need to be discerning and we need to be sober in how we share certain things. 'Cause I'm seeing a lot of things that were plainly wrong and people are believing them. And here's, I think, where the media is messing up once again. And some of these influencers who are media adjacent are messing up once again. The Trump administration is going to give you enough stuff to talk about. It's going to give it to you based on the decisions that are being made. You don't have to exaggerate things or make things up to make it worse, because that's how you get into this place again where nobody believes the media. Nobody believes a a certain group of influencers anymore outside of their small niche, because we're putting stuff out there that 10 minutes later, a half a day later, we find out just wasn't true, right? Trump completely took away Black History Month, stuff like that. Were there things done with DEI? Yes, but we need to be very particular about what was done and what wasn't done. That matters. And sometimes we think just throwing out every negative thing we can actually helps us, but I think Trump has proved that doesn't really hurt him. And so if you really want people to see things your way, you got to be very careful with what information you repeat and put out there, okay? Let's chill, let's be more thoughtful, more discerning, and more sober about the information that we put out. Not all the information that fits our narrative needs to be immediately put out there. And I'll say this too, Christians, I don't care which side you're on, you have to realize, and this is what's wrong with this, all the good people are on my side, all the bad people are on their side. There are people on your side, regardless of which side you're on, that will feed you bad information to get a reaction out of you or get you to start think a certain way. You cannot trust everything that comes from your side, because sometimes people are trying to be provocative. Sometimes people are trying to make things seem worse, even if things are really bad already. So you have to be discerning and thoughtful with what you share. Okay? Cool. So I just wanted to start with that because I'm seeing this too much. But I will also mention that this is a reason that I've changed what I'm doing in my stories on Instagram. So what I'm doing on Instagram is I'm putting about 3 stories a day that talk about important issues that are kind of muddled in mainstream media. You don't really know what to think. I'm pointing those out, and I'm also using my feed to clarify things where misinformation has been put out there. I don't care if it's bad for Trump, good for Trump. No, that's not my concern. I'm trying to help people kind of filter through some of this information. So I've gotten a lot more views, thousands of views in my stories, because I'm doing that. I'm doing my stories a little bit differently, and it seems to be helping people out. So you can stop by if you want to check that out. All right. As always, I got to give a shout out to our patrons and supporters for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. This is a unique podcast. This is a unique organization. And without the people that support us by going on our website andcampaign.org and donating monthly, without the people that go on patreon.com/churchpolitics and give to that, we would not be able to do this. If you become a patron on patreon.com/churchpolitics, you will also get an extra segment. So last week, you can see my segment from last week where I talked about what I think about DEI. I went into depth on what I think about that. This week, I'll be answering your questions. So if you are one of those people who's given monthly, you can ask me questions. And every so often, I will answer questions from the audience, okay? Greatly appreciate you. We would not be here without you. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like and subscribe, okay? All right. So you know how it is. Grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think, not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but to think like a Christian. And we're going to start where we normally start, which is in Scripture. And this first segment is going to be about oligarchs and oligarchy. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit of context of how the Bible talks about great wealth. So let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 9. It says, "Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction." I think what the Bible is saying here is that if being rich is your primary goal in life, if that's your primary objective with your existence, then we will likely fall into sin. Okay? However, if we read the Bible, and I'll talk about this a little more, being rich in and of itself is not a sin. It does not mean automatically that you're unrighteous. Okay. So we're setting that up as context for what we're about to talk about. And I'm not using that scripture to condemn any particular person that I'm about to talk about. Okay. I want to set that as the context. But I do want to talk about some people. Okay. First, Elon Musk. We know that Elon Musk spent around $250 million to help Trump get elected. The last number that I heard, to be more exact, was $288 million. After the election, he also spent a good amount of time kind of hobnobbing with Trump at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. And now we see that Musk has a considerable amount of influence in the Trump administration. He's now running the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE. This agency's purpose is to modernize federal technology and software to maximize governmental efficiency and productivity. And from what I'm hearing, as part of that mission, it will be reducing the federal workforce significantly. No small matter, okay? Now, you all know the name Elon Musk. He's the CEO of Tesla. He's the owner of SpaceX. He's the owner of Twitter, or X. And I would have to say this, whether I like him or not, by an objective opinion, by an objective standard, Musk is a genius. And I've heard many on the left say, oh, he's not really that smart. He just steals people's ideas and blah, blah. No, 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 no. We have to admit that not everybody we disagree with or dislike is stupid. He's not stupid. You don't get to where he's at right now by being stupid. Okay. So we need to be able to admit that. But in the midst of giving him credit for that, I would also say that in many instances, he seems to be unprincipled. For instance, he claimed to be a free speech absolutist, but on a number of occasions, he's been caught silencing people who disagree with him on his platform. If you look at how he treats workers, he's far from pro-labor. He's far from pro-worker. I think there's some serious issues there. And it's one thing that frustrates me about Elon Musk is he's unserious about important issues. And you don't have to take that from me. You can go check his Twitter account for yourself. It's a mix of trolling and adolescent locker room jokes, again, on serious matters where he has influence, right? Which even makes it worse. I would say that it's fair to also say that he has some serious business conflicts or potential business conflicts. Let me say that. He has some serious potential business conflicts when it comes to some of these government contracts while working in the government. That's dubious. And he also has, I should say, a dubious and, if not dependent, relationship with the Chinese government, which creates a conflict within itself. This is a government that he never seems to want to have any tension with or to criticize. You can almost see him as a China apologist. And here's the interesting thing. Despite he and Trump's relationship, he's been advocating against the president's graphite tariffs that he's placing on China. So you're working in the government for somebody and at the same time advocating against what they're trying to do. Maybe somebody can help me make sense of that. Anyway, one of the big things that folks have been talking about, though, is he recently called the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is known as USAID, a criminal organization. Now, USAID provides foreign aid and development assistance to other countries. Its mission is to help end poverty, to promote democracy, and improve global health. But now Elon is saying that it's time for it to close because, again, it is a criminal organization. Now, to be fair, there are some serious and not completely outlandish allegations that some of the funds coming from USAID have been used for nefarious purposes. Even if we were to assume that that's true, my problem with his approach to this and how he talks about it is you'll also see that some of this money goes to some very good places. Some of it goes to religious organizations who are doing some very good things. So instead of reforming it to make it better, we just kind of chop it all up because guess what? That's more provocative. All right. So with all this stuff going on, all these potential conflicts, the way that he talks about serious issues, he still has a lot of influence in the Trump administration. And I personally believe that he has far too much influence as an unelected person, as an unelected leader within this administration. We just found out that DOGE just got access to the Treasury payment system data, but we have no idea what mechanisms have been put in place to make sure that that data isn't misused, or that, I mean, there's just not, you see this access, but you're not seeing, hey, but we're making sure this or that isn't happening. Like, what kind of vetting have we done? I need to know more to feel good about this. And I probably still wouldn't feel good about it. Right. So based on the outsized influence that Musk has in the administration, a lot of people, not just on the left, but especially on the left, have been talking about oligarchs and oligarchy. It's become one of those, buzzwords as of late. Now, just in case you're not familiar with those terms, an oligarchy is a form of government that's not run by the people, but it's run by rich and powerful elites, which you would call oligarchs. And this kind of comes from Russia and all that back in history. Okay. Now, talking about oligarchy, does Justin Giboney believe that this is no longer a democracy, but an oligarchy? No. I believe that this is still a constitutional republic, and that we have a democracy that is worth fighting for, and that the American ideal and the ideal of our democracy is still an ideal worth aspiring to. Now, has that been compromised? Do certain people in elite spaces and who have a lot of money have too much influence? Yes. Has it compromised the system to the point where I don't think this is a constitutional republic anymore? No, I wouldn't go that far. But let me also say this as we talk about, I want to frame this and put some limits on this conversation too, because it's important. We have to be very slow to single out one group as the cause of all problems. And I see some people taking this a little too far, right? I don't think everybody from any one class or any one culture is all evil and the cause of all our problems. In fact, being someone who loves history, I understand that that's a very dangerous point of view, and I want to push us away from that. We have to judge each person, each organization on their own merits. And if we try to act like one group, one class is responsible for everything, that's how some of the worst atrocities, happen. Okay? Be very careful. But let's go back and let's look at what the Bible has to say about rich people, people with great wealth. Now, when I read through this, I see the Bible challenging rich people and detailing the temptations that come with great wealth. All right, you have the rich man and Lazarus and Lazarus in Luke 16. Didn't end up well for that rich man. You have the rich fool in Luke 12. Didn't end up well for my man, okay? But you also, and this is what you got to pay attention to, you also have Joseph of Arimathea, who was rich and, as the Bible says, righteous. He opposed the council's decision to crucify Jesus. He used his influence to get possession of Jesus's body. He prepares Jesus' body for burial and places his body in his tomb. So I want to remind you that the gospel doesn't let us look at one group of people and condemn that whole group of people in that way. The gospel doesn't allow us to do that. Okay? That said, I still do think that money and elites have too much influence in our democracy. And I think if we continue to allow that without some level of reform, then the one man, one vote principle, again, becomes compromised. And so whether it's enforcing antitrust laws or a number of things that we can do, it's a problem within our system right now. Does it make us a complete oligarchy? I don't think we're there yet. Okay. Now, the other thing that I know, as I hear a lot of people on the left using, using this buzzword, and I think it's worth being concerned about, don't get me wrong. But the other thing that I know is that, as concerned as I am about what Trump and Elon are doing, this didn't start with them. Right? They are, now they're far more open about it, it seems, whether that's wise or not. But it's been going on for a long time. Right? We can talk about the Gilded Age. We can talk about the robber barons, a number of things. This stuff has been happening, and there was times when we had to have a great reform. But it's been going on even, you don't even have to go that far in history, right? Because I would remind you that the administration that was in office before Trump had Zuckerberg shutting down the social media accounts of people who had messages that they didn't approve of. I'll remind you that Citizens United, that Supreme Court decision, came down in 2010. And that Supreme Court decision allowed corporations to give unlimited contributions to political action committees. It treated corporations like people for the purposes of free speech and political contributions. I personally think that was just bad jurisprudence. Just my opinion. Oh, here's another one. Instead of having a thorough and thoughtful conversation about how we could care for people who are transgender while staying true to biological and physiological facts, instead of having that thoughtful and a thorough conversation about caring for these transgender people, elites from on high issued and imposed their mandates on this issue with no debate, no conversation, no consensus from the people. Apparently, they were intelligent enough and they deemed themselves benevolent enough to flip society upside down without the people's input. They implemented this ideology into children's entertainment and into some schools with a kind of tyrannical force. And the common people were commanded to comply or be canceled. So while I hope we continue to call out Trump for this, because we're doing it for good reason, remember the elitism and the oligarchs influencing the opposition that have been in place for a minute. Oh, and don't forget about this one, because this is what I consider one of the greatest injustices of my lifetime. Don't forget about how during Republican and Democratic administrations, banks were allowed to give out predatory loans, knowing that those loans would fail. When those loans did fail, they made money off the failing loans. Then they were judged to be too big to fail. So when they were too big to fail, the American people bailed them out. And even shortly after the American people bailed them out, they still got bonuses. And even after they got bonuses and got bailed out by the American people, they didn't give the American people whose homes they stole their homes back. Now, don't forget about that one. That particular injustice makes it very hard for these you must choose a side people. One side is great, one side is other. Which side should we choose on that issue, guys? We can dislike the oligarchs that are in power at this moment, but don't be fooled. There's a reason that presidents say that one of the first things they learn when they get into office is that they don't have as much power as they thought they would. It's because there's people that are in place, regardless of which side wins, that make sure their interests are looked after. I'll be right back with another segment, and I have a special guest. But you ask yourself, where do you get a segment like that? Where else you go to get a segment like that? We'll be right back.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
And I am back on the Church Politics Podcast. But like I told you, I have a guest. This guest is a friend of mine who you might have seen with me on Lecrae's podcast. This is my boy Cory Ruth. Cory Ruth is a businessman here in Atlanta, Georgia. He is also a politico and a commentator and a man of God. Cory, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing quite well.
Good. Well, I'm glad to have you with me. Are you ordained too? Were you ordained?
I am actually.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's right.
In a past life, I was ordained and consecrated as an overseer in the Lord's church. So
That's right. That's right. I thought you had said I couldn't remember, but I figured I'd ask you live on the show. You know what I'm saying? Now, always good to be with you, man. We have a lot of really good back and forth. Obviously, your background is in the Republican Party. My background is in the Democratic Party. And we find that we have some disagreements, as we did on Lecrae's podcast, but also a lot of similarities, a lot of things that we can agree on. I think especially when it comes to how we listen to other people and how we should be thoughtful about other ideas and not kind of just go along with everything that our side has to say. So greatly appreciate you on that. We recently had a short conversation in the DMs of Instagram about a clip that I posted. And in that clip, it was Bernie Sanders. It was last week. It was Bernie Sanders going back and forth with RFK Jr. And the question that Bernie Sanders asked RFK Jr. is, was healthcare a human right? Okay, that's the question that he asked them. And so I'm going to ask you the same question, but at first I want to give people a definition of what a human right is, right? Because some people was like, hey, if I really want people to have it and really think people should have it and it's good, then it's a human right. According to UNICEF, so I pulled this, off UNICEF. Human rights are standards that recognize and protect the dignity of all human beings. Human rights govern how individual human beings live in society and with each other, as well as their relationship with the state and the obligations that the state has towards them. Human rights laws obliges governments to do some things and prevents them from doing others. Individuals also have responsibilities in using their human rights. They must respect the rights of others. No government, group, or individual person has the right to do anything that violates another's human rights. Cory, talk to me a little bit. Is healthcare a human right?
I think you nailed it with that definition. I mean, the United Nations defines it as, uh, you know, those sort of rights and freedoms that every person is entitled to, simply because they're human. And so, it's hard to say that something is a right if it's not something that is universal and inalienable and that applies to everyone, everywhere, and that cannot be taken away. So, a good exercise that I use when I'm considering whether something is a human right, outside of those things that are enumerated in the founding documents, is whether this would apply in a third world. The United States is in a position of abundance. So not every nation is in a position to provide universal health care to all of its citizens. So I think it's hard to call it a right. You can make an appeal to human decency, right? You can say, given the wealth of our nation, that healthcare is a moral imperative. When one should. You can make an economic argument that given that the country is projected to spend what $1.8 trillion in 2025 alone, providing healthcare to 178 million people, that maybe we should be doing it more efficiently, more strategically, more streamlined or centralized, and that we should probably try and stretch that. What's another 20? I'm assuming what's a number? Another, can we stretch that to another 20 or 40 million people and cover everyone? And then, of course, one can make the distinction between paying for healthcare, which is what the United States does right now, and actually providing healthcare, which is what we do for the VA, but it's not something that we do.
So when you say, because I noticed a lot, because I got a lot of comments on this, and I was glad that people were engaging with this question, because I think it's a real serious question. But I did get the assumption that some people felt that if people didn't think it was a human right, then they didn't really think people should have it.
Yeah, I think
is that what you're saying, or are you saying something different?
No, yeah, that's a misnomer. I'm saying that, so a right is, you should have a basic human right to your safety, right? You shouldn't have to fear that someone is going to assault you. That should be a right that's protected by the federal government. Our Constitution, which is based on the Enlightenment, which was the first time in history that anyone was thinking about what humans' rights are. That we have a right to assemble, or we have a right to, free speech. But those things don't cost money, and those things should be protected, whether we like it or we don't like it. But th- that doesn't mean that it's not a moral imperative.
Yeah. Well,
It just
let me
means,
ask you this, because it seems, and I'm gonna go a little bit philosophical on you, but I'm gonna explain it. It seems like, and this is where a lot of conservatives are in general, you may only believe in negative rights, which is you have a right you have a right to freedom of speech, which means somebody can't stop you from speaking. Somebody can't stop you from assembling, but you don't have a right to what some people would call positive rights, which is saying not only do I have a right from somebody not stopping me from doing something, I have a right to something, right? To get something. And what you're saying, it sounds like you're saying no, you have negative rights, not necessarily positive human rights, because positive human rights mean we have to take in consideration um, resources, other people's resources. We also have to take consideration time. Because I would say this, even in countries where there's universal health care, not everybody gets treated for every single thing they have immediately, right? Like there's some things that you might have that based on the amount of time that doctors have, based on the amount of the resources, that you may or may not get treatment for those. So if we're saying it's a human right, we would also have to define what that minimal level of healthcare would be, and might be under what some people would want to. But I want to get to that question to you. Are you basically saying no, you have negative rights, you don't have any positive human rights?
yeah. That's my first time hearing that. But I like that just off the cuff. That I think it's also pragmatic. It's certain things that, I mean, once you make it a positive right, it's harder for us to guarantee it. But I can guarantee that people won't take something from you. The founder said, used the turn of phrase pursuit of happiness, right? So I allow you to pursue that, but I'm not going to guarantee your happiness. And
Yeah.
so, but that again, I want to make sure people don't take away. That doesn't mean that something is not a moral imperative. And so, I
Based on the circumstances of the country, right? So somebody could say
yes,
based on the wealth of the country, it may
right,
not be a human right, but it's a moral imperative that the U.S. do more, right? Or
absolutely,
that Corey pay $50 more in taxes so that somebody else can be taken care of. Because I think what we probably both agree on is people should not be going bankrupt to get basic health care assistance. You know what I mean? Like I hate to see that.
I hate that too. And I think really where we're at right now is we're in, on one hand, you have a group that is committed to, providing universal health care, or at least ensuring universal health care. And then you have the other group that's in denial, and that's on the right. We're in denial that the federal government spends about $2 trillion a year on healthcare already, full stop.
Right.
And that the federal government also delivers healthcare through the VA, to many people as well. And so this pretense on the right that the federal government should not get involved in healthcare, when it's already deeply involved in healthcare. To me, I think we're in a place where we need to either say, let's stop the federal government from doing healthcare at all, which doesn't seem to be practical, or we should say, how can we make this more efficient to make sure that we're providing for care for everyone, and using the same $2 trillion that we already use.
Yeah. Yeah. See, for me, I want to say that it's a human right. My legal background and understanding what rights are also says people use that a little too loosely, right?
Yeah,
Just because I really want people to have something and I think we can provide it. You give a great example, which is very similar to what I was going to do. It doesn't mean if I'm a benevolent leader running a small African country, and I can't provide I want to, but I can't provide my people health care. Does that mean I violated their human rights?
yeah,
I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, I see where people are going with that, but I think words matter. You know what I'm saying? And so when we say something's a human rights means it is guaranteed for their dignity regardless. Now, I don't know that I say that we only have negative rights. I think there are some positive rights, but in general, it has to be something that I can provide to you, even if I'm not in a rich country. Now, if I am in a rich country, even if it's not a human right, to your point, it still may be a moral imperative based on our situation and the context of what's going on. And so I don't think we're far off, especially with the fact that, you know, that our country could do more because people are suffering and our healthcare system is trash. It's bad.
Well, it's just outdated. I think it was built on the industrial era where people were thinking about workers' rights and then also trying to incentivize workers once labor became competitive and they said, hey, we'll provide you with healthcare. And so it just became a thing where corporations were providing healthcare. And we now need to revisit and say, is this the most efficient now that people are moving in between work a lot more frequently? Whereas in the past, you get a job coming out of college or high school and you be there for the next 40 years. And that's not the case anymore. And so that system is less efficient. And for my brothers and sisters on the right, we're not talking about creating something that the government is mandated to do out of thin air. This is something the government is already deeply engaged in. And I think we should be thinking about the gaps. Like, there's no hospitals in the rural. There's a crisis of hospitals, hospital access, medical access in rural areas, right? And so, is that a place where the private sector is saying it doesn't make sense for us to go there from a for-profit perspective? So, is that a place where the government should be delivering healthcare? And when you look at in the city of Atlanta, we just lost a major healthcare provider and a major hospital, and so we need to ask ourselves, because right now the federal government pays for healthcare. And whenever you're writing checks, the cost skyrockets. It has an inflationary effect on the industry. But if the federal government said, where are the gaps, or state government, I don't want to distinguish. I'll let that be an argument, a debate about who should be delivering it. But if the government said, where are the gaps? Let's make sure we're delivering healthcare where there's gaps. Then I think what that does is it provides a low cost or at cost competitor to the private sector, which should hold down cost while increasing the quality of service. And so, not to go back to something Hillary said about the public option, if you would, but we're already spending $2 trillion. If I said, hey, let's take Elon Musk, why don't you look at that $2 trillion and let's take a view of how we can do that more efficiently, provide care for more people, cover all of our gaps, our marketplace gaps. And that way we're supporting the private sector by covering healthcare in areas that it just doesn't make sense for them to cover.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think you're on to something there. I'm more of a public option person too. While I think the government has a role in that everybody should have access and kind of more robust access, I don't want the government running all that. I just don't think. I think that we don't have to completely remove the profit motive. It needs to be regulated better, but government doesn't do everything all that well. You know what I'm saying? And so I wouldn't limit people to that.
There's a Christian podcast. There's also some religious rights implications there, right? Because healthcare covers so many things, and some of which have ethical and religious considerations.
For sure.
And so when we empower the government wholly to provide healthcare, then we're forfeiting that religious considerations and ethical considerations to the government.
No, that's good. Let me ask you this. What do you think of some of these? I don't know how close you've been watching it, but what have you thought of some of these senatorial nominations hearings, RFK, Patel? What are your thoughts on how this is going, and are these folks going to get through?
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing for the broader America, outside of people on the right, to understand is the perspective of President Donald Trump. This is a guy who his campaign was spied on in 2015. That the FBI lied to get FISA warrants to spy on his campaign and to continue spying on his presidency in the first 2 years. This is somebody who was impeached twice from his perspective, unjustly. This is somebody who had charges brought against him after he left office. And this is somebody who had his home raided by that FBI. This is somebody who the Secret Service dropped the ball and allowed him to he had allowed 2 credible assassination attempts against his life, some of which are inexplicable. And we're not even talking about who these people are and what happened. The story just kind of went away. And so from Trump's perspective, he's saying, okay, there are people who are career bureaucrats in this country who don't like me and who are committed to undermining my presidency. So I think that's number one. So the people that he's putting in place, especially Patel, especially Tulsi Gabbard, these are people that he feels will be looking out for his interest, people who will be they know the ins and outs of these bureaucracies, and they're in a position to identify, sort of misbehavior, if you would. And so that's why he's picking these guys. But I think my overall on how they have performed, I think they were more articulate and more thoughtful than people probably assumed with them coming. They, like Patel, really understood the ins and outs of the FBI. But I also think there's some real considerations. Do you want me to get into the individuals or?
Yeah, a little bit quickly. Yep.
Yeah, like especially with Tulsi Gabbard. So I think Tulsi Gabbard has purported herself well. I think she is qualified, having been a congresswoman and been on those intelligence committees, and also currently in the military with a ranking and a clearance. I think she's qualified. But the question that people have to ask about her is, she won't call Eric Snowden a traitor. He essentially stole and publicized Americans' trade secrets and then ran off to our 2 biggest adversaries.
And I think we'd have to say there was a lot more in there than just trade secrets. Right?
For sure. And I think, for me, I always said, from the very beginning, I did not like Eric Snowden. I did not like what he did. I feel like there's much more nefarious than him just being disgruntled or feeling like seeing something that he didn't like. And I still hold out the possibility that he was actually an agent working for either Russia or China. But that's me. And I don't think there's anything in the evidence that would suggest that's not the case. And so I do think there's people going to have to wonder, like, do we want somebody over our intelligence that has this sort of view about our intelligence? And that's something that she might lose some Republicans on.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I thought she actually handled herself well. I could tell a lot of the Republican senators didn't like that she wouldn't call out Snowden. I saw that may be trouble. I wonder how hard Trump's going to go for her, and that may that may settle it. So that I think that's the one thing that a lot of folks, if she loses the Republican votes, it'll be over that. Yeah. People have been asking the question: is Bernie going to vote for her? Because she actually left the DNC because because of how they treated Bernie, right? So is he going to return the favor? We'll have to see. I'll be honest with you. I flirted with RFK. All right. I just didn't think he did that great. I thought he was very evasive. When you talk about his point of view when it comes to people getting the shots and all this other stuff, and is he a denier? I can't say that he was straightforward with that. But there are aspects, of Make America Healthy Again that, as a parent and as somebody who long has felt like the people who are supposed to be protecting us in these agencies, who are supposed to be looking at our food and making sure that it's okay, I feel like there's been too much corporate capture And so I do like a kind of reformation in that space, because I think they're totally captured that their number one goal. It's hard to tell that it's protecting us and our families from things that can hurt us,
And I think
especially when you sell one thing here and then can't sell in another country because you know it's cancer causing, right? I mean, that happens over and over again. So I'll say that Patel's a little, I get why he wants to say, I'm bringing in some totally different. Patel, just based on some of his commentary, social media, and the things he said before, that's a hard one for me. But I'll let you have the last word, then we'll go take a break.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the hard thing for these senators vis-a-vis RFK Jr. is that I think the average American feels like something's wrong, right? It seems like there's more cancer. It seems like there's more ailments for children. It seems like there's more health challenges these days than there were when we were growing up.
Diabetes numbers are out crazy.
Yeah, right? Especially with young people. And so I think people are like, well, I at least want to see something. And you're not hearing an alternative, right? You're not hearing that. You're just hearing a pushback against him, which kind of plays into his argument that you guys are all captured. So,
yeah, I mean, the FDA and others, man, I think in some way, and I'm sure there's great people that work there, right? I'm not talking about everybody, but in general, I think they have failed the American people in many ways, and there needs to be some reform. We will be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up, but with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
We are back on the Church Politics Podcast. I am again with my friend, Cory Ruth. Cory, maybe you heard about this. I don't know if you heard about it or not, but the Democratic National Convention just elected new leadership. So the new chairman is Ken Martin, and the vice chair is David Hogg, who is a graduate of, I think, Harvard, and he's a gun control advocate. I think he went to one of the schools where there was a shooting and kind of, he's been somewhat controversial. I'm not sure that these are the two candidates that change, that kind of right the ship for the Democrats. But what I want to talk to you, I want to get an outside perspective on Democrats that you see, that you say, okay, this person might be either this next election after, cycle after, somebody who could be formidable for the Republican Party. What names come to mind when you're thinking about that?
Yeah, and I'm thinking from the perspective of our bench is going to be led by J.D. Vance.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have Marco Rubio and Nikki Haley as sort of the standard bearers for the Republican Party. And this is, they're going to start 2 years from now, right? And so I think the only name that I have concerns about on the Democrat side, I mean, obviously someone could emerge like Obama did, right? But the only name that I have concern about is Gavin Newsom. And Shapiro, Whitmer, Pritzker, Cooper, Bashir, all of these guys are, sort of in the mode of these like sort of fresh-faced rhetoricians that I think, are in the mode of Obama. And, Gavin is old school politics. He's comes from that Clinton era, and he doesn't have a problem going on Fox News, for instance, and making his case with Sean Hannity. He doesn't have a problem that he met Trump on the tarmac when he landed in California without an invite, and is not afraid to stand there and have a conversation with him and negotiate. And that's the type of Democrat that's going to be difficult to defeat, I think, especially given that J.D. Vance, as good as he is on his feet and as smart as he is, may be getting a sort of building a sort of narrative around him of this sort of toxic alpha, and being unlikable and combative. And I think it's because he's in that Trump administration, and because he's having to do that, right? Because Trump wants to change the
He's the
world.
attack dog.
Yeah, so they have to attack all the time. And so I think Gavin Newsom or any of those guys, right, Shapiro especially, can come
Yeah.
in and be that nicer person that seems like they're more workable.
Yeah. I mean, Gavin Newsom's name comes up a lot because I think he is a smooth retail politician.
Yes.
Outside of that, I don't see any way that he could be the best person. If you look at what's going on in California, from the fires, right, the negligence that came along with that, to people are leaving there in droves.
In droves.
It's
Yeah.
on my side. When people bring up Gavin, I almost think you're not being a serious. You're not thinking about this seriously.
Yeah.
Do you want the best person, or you want the person that you just think is the smoothest or whatever? And if you look at some of the things he supported and all that, I mean, it's between him and Pritzker. If you look at their states and what they've supported, I just can't. It's hard for me to take that seriously. Now, that doesn't mean they won't be up there, because they got the bread, they got the connections. But if I'm gonna say who I would want, those guys I just wouldn't put up there. Here's some names that I like.
Who would you? Yeah.
Yeah, I like Ro Khanna. Now, he's just a congressman, California congressman, Indian American, and he's too far left from me on social issues, and he's more of a Bernie style guy. So I don't necessarily even agree with him on some of the issues.
He has a different.
But he's a serious thinker, and he listens to people, and he's one of those guys that goes on all the shows and is very substantive,
on Fox, he's on
and
everything.
knows that he's not going to get everything he wants.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. So I think he's a grown up in the room, and so I really do like Ro Khanna. I like Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland. Right, he connects with people. I think he's a strong cat.
I just want to see how he responds to getting punched in the face. Right. So I haven't seen him do that yet.
Well, I'm gonna give you something for all of these people that I think they're gonna have to face. I also like, and I know she lost the Senate race and all this, I still like Val Demings. I'm not letting go of Val. I think Val Demings is very talented. Will get another shot, and she may run for Rubio's spot next time that comes up or something like that. Maybe too soon for her to run for Senate, but I really do like her in the public square, and I think she's a serious person, especially for somebody like Wes Moore and Ro and Ro Khanna and the rest of them. Can they somehow get themselves from under some of these very extreme positions that progressives have put on them, right? So we can go talk about a number of issues where the Democratic Party and progressives are so far away in those kind of elitist cultural value stuff, so far away from regular people. I feel like Wes Moore is somebody who connects with people.
Yeah.
But you lose that connection once you start talking about, some of the stuff that really hurt Kamala. Yeah. Can they detach themselves from that? Which actually is going to take some courage, because there's a lot of money behind it, right? When you look at something like the transgender issue, and we always want to be compassionate about that issue, but 70% of Americans say, hey, man, come on, let's be serious. You can't put a biological male in a sport with women.
Yeah.
But you still don't see a whole lot of Democrats saying that. Why? The bread, man, the bag is too good, right? Like, they don't want to either they need the money for their campaigns, or they don't want to have to go up against it and kind of be in conflict with it. But go ahead.
No, I was going to ask about that. That's something I was wondering about. It's like, what is this commitment to things that I think Americans don't consider to be, sort of mainstream, and like, I'm very compassionate when it comes to the transgender issue. It's an industry that my wife works in, and she does it as a Christian, and in terms of helping people to navigate that lifestyle in a healthy way, right? So when you think about the diseases that are disproportionate in that community, but
right.
So I feel like the American people are where I am on that. Like, hey, live and let live. But when you're starting to talk about putting them in sports, and this is almost one-sided, right? We talk about integrating women's sports, but we never talk about Brittany Griner playing for the NBA, right? So
Right.
she can transition as she has and still play in the WNBA. And no one ever talks about
And
integrating.
that's the absurdity about it, right? Like, this is
Yeah,
somebody who's basically made herself male, and we're gonna pretend that we don't know the reason she's not playing in the NBA. We all know the reason,
we
guy.
know the
You know, and
reason.
it's not bad. Like, that doesn't mean she's not a great player in her own right. But there's a reason she didn't say, "Oh yeah, I'm a man. Now I have to play in the NBA."
Yeah.
Come on, guy. And it's the absurdity of it. But I think while most people see that, and there are some true believers. So I don't want to say everybody is just being ambitious and knows that's what they have to do to get past again. And before we got on, I had a whole conversation about the elite and oligarchy and all that. So that was my first segment. But I really do think there's a lot of people. Pritzker is one of them, one of the main funders of some of this stuff. That it's just too much. And I think most Democratic candidates, even if they see the flaws in it, just aren't willing to go up against those guys. And I'll be honest with you, the last time that I was I was at Congress, I spoke before some Congress people at the congressional offices in November. And that's what I said. I said, dude, there was never a conversation about this. You all know, like I know, that this came from on high and you were all forced to go along with it. And somebody has to have the courage to say, no, we can be caring, but we're not going to push the American people into absurdity. So I think there's true believers, and I think there's people who just don't want to have to fight that battle.
I also think too, and just getting into Black Democrats and Black Republicans, and because you and I have had several conversations that I'm trying to work on a framework for what does it mean to be a Black Republican, and what should I be focused on. And one of the things that I'm realizing is that from the very beginning in American politics, Blacks have been a moderating force on American politics, and
Yep.
whether we did it intentionally or unintentionally. And Black people, Americans are the only people in the world who've never been under a monarchy or a dictatorship. And so we have this sort of frontier freedom where, that can get kind of wild. But Blacks are here, and we haven't had that legacy of liberty. And so we've been a mooring on American liberty, with sort of a common sense pull on American liberty. And that has been helpful to the Democratic Party and helpful to America writ large. And I feel like there's been sort of a silencing of Black people, because if Kamala Harris had someone Black who grew up Black in a Black church with a Black big mama and a Black everything, and that person had courage to say, wait a minute, this isn't going to work with our people, because I got to go back to Thanksgiving dinner and my family going to be like, what's going on? And I feel like that moderating voice is not happening in the Democratic Party right now.
It's gone. And I'll be honest with you, to talk about my side, I think that was one of the big misplays on our part. When Obama was in office, we just decided to support people. We don't want to push back, but that's not how politics work. And it happened again with Kamala. Instead of coming saying, hey, as Black church, blame us, but you're not going all the way to the left on this issue. It's actually going to help the party. It's actually going to help the candidate. But I think what the thought is we don't want to do anything that helps Trump. But it's not helping. It's helping. If you moderate on the issue, it's actually helping you. But I think it was just a bad play. It was a bad play, and I think not the best strategy. And I think it's had an impact on the country as a whole. So I think you're right for pointing that out, man. Let me say this: we're out of time. Got to have you come back, man. Enjoyed the conversation with you, man, and just the thoughtful way that you go about it. So thank you. Any last comments you want to make?
No, I mean, I think America needs Black folks to be Black folks, right? Like, we have a unique history here. We have a unique culture. We have a unique way of parenting that's very pragmatic and real world. And America needs that in order to moderate. And I think we're in this sort of crazy period on both sides, because Black Republicans and Black Democrats ain't being Black. And it's hurting both parties and ultimately hurting America.
Man, that's a word. Well, you heard it here, man. As y'all know, I appreciate you. Thanks for joining us. We will have Cory back. And you know what it is, and Camp. There's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, Ann Camp. Well, I'll let you.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.